Marcus Hellyer is a senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute who specialises in defence economics. He explained exactly what kinds of systems could end up in Saudi hands.
Well, the kinds of systems that have been in the media are what are called remote weapons systems. So that's a machine, essentially, that you would put on top of a vehicle. You could then mount a weapon or a sensor or a combination of weapons and sensors on the remote weapons station, and then the operator could sit safely inside the vehicle without having to expose themselves. And it also allows the weapon to be used very precisely because rather than the soldier just firing wildly from the hip or from the shoulder, it's mounted, it's guided by a very precise system, and so you can fire very accurately. The kinds of remote weapon stations that the company that has been in the media, EOS, exports are capable of mounting a heavy machine gun or a 20 or 30 millimetre cannon, which is quite a powerful weapon, or indeed a grenade launcher. And EOS has had a lot of success exporting them to overseas customers and also to the Defence Force here.
So should systems with these capabilities be sold to countries like Saudi Arabia if they do have those capabilities?
Well, it's interesting because the customer that EOS said they're selling these systems to is not the Saudi military per se, but the Saudi Interior Ministry, which is technically responsible for internal security in Saudi Arabia. So it's a very powerful sort of weapon for a home security organisation to be using. So either, so you would think that maybe they think they have some pretty serious domestic security concerns, potentially from terrorists. But the thing you'd really want to look at if you were in defence and you were doing the analysis to support an export licence would be, is there any possibility of these systems being used in somewhere like Yemen? So you'd be looking at, has the Interior Ministry been operating in Yemen, or is there a history of leakage from the Interior Ministry over to the military, which is operating in Yemen? And those are the sorts of questions that Defence's Export Control Office would be looking at. And hopefully the answer to that would be there is no record of the Interior Ministry operating in Yemen.
But the point is, as we heard today from the Senate Estimates Committee, is that they can't give those guarantees.
That's exactly right. So it's like most intelligence analysis, which really this is a form of intelligence analysis, is you'd be making an assessment on the balance of probabilities. But I think we need to sort of distinguish between that assessment process, which is being done inside defence, and really the broader political questions. So when you're exporting weapons to another country, essentially you have to ensure you meet your international legal obligations, which is what bureaucrats in the Department of Defence are doing, but also it's a political decision. And so the government at any time could simply say, we're not going to export weapons to a particular country. And that's exactly what Germany has done. So Angela Merkel's government last year said they weren't going to export weapons to Saudi Arabia point blank. And that's actually ended up costing Germany financially quite heavily. There's reports that Saudi Arabia was their second biggest export market, and so their defence exports went down by 25% last year. So the government could do that if they felt that they wanted to send a message to Saudi Arabia and to the international community that Saudi Arabia was not the kind of country they wanted to do business with. But it has chosen not to send that message.
And that's an interesting point, that tension between wanting to do business, of course, and to get these kind of deals across the line and the human rights issues that are raised. Do you think the lines were blurred here in this clearance being given for these sales to go ahead?
Well, again, it comes down to, it's technically, I would imagine, legal to do this. I think the bureaucrats in defence and the intelligence analysts would be doing their job very conscientiously and using all the information available to them. But again, ultimately, it is a political decision. You know, you're no doubt aware that in the Middle East, we're seeing a competition between Saudi Arabia as the leader of the Sunni Muslims and Iran as the leader of the Shiite Muslims, both vying, in a sense, for leadership of the Middle East. And, you know, the government is essentially making a statement of, you know, whose side are we on? You know, and the government's saying, well, we're on the side of Saudi Arabia because they're seeking to contain Iran.
And of course, these are tensions that have only risen since the death of Jamal Khashoggi, where countries are facing a real challenge about whether they do business with Saudi. And as you point out, there are geopolitical sensibilities as well. So what is your thinking in terms of whether those should be put aside, those sensitivities around human rights, and that we should do business with Saudi?
Well, again, ultimately, you know, there are the sort of legal, international legal issues and the political geostrategic issues. But, you know, as many people said, when the government came out and said with its defence industry policy and its defence export policy and very explicitly said it wanted to become a top 10 defence exporter, many people said that, well, it's going to get you into some very ethically murky areas. So the countries that do well at exporting are not only selling a good product, but they are selling it to customers who may not share your values, may not share your political viewpoints. And so you are constantly going to be making a bunch of sort of value-based decisions to say, well, we may not agree with everything that this government does, and we may, in fact, disagree with some of the things that this government does, the customer, that is. But in the grand scheme of things, in a geopolitical sense, we have to swallow those qualms. And because we think it's makes sense in this case to back Saudi Arabia against Iran.
Marcus, great to get your insights into this. Thank you.
Thank you.